We're going all the way, folks. All the way. And the last time that was the case was that year. And Liberty Media is loving this. Of course, the news about what the two lineups over at Racing Bulls and Red Bull Racing will be next year is on the mind of those in F1, but the sudden sting in the tail was captured with F1's production of simple but powerful posters. Two of them, one before the race in Qatar, which had Lando presented with Championship Point, and then after the race, it was Max Verstappen pasted on with the caption, Game On. Remember, Oscar Piastri is also there, folks, so where's his poster? Because if we get a laser-focused Lando who's too busy concentrating on Max and they get into some kind of tangle, like Piastri and Verstappen did last year where they span out at turn 1, Oscar could be right there to take it away from both of them. But I can understand that Max's case is a little bit easier to understand for the layman in that all he's got to do really, the easiest permutation, is win the race and Lando isn't on the podium. And look what happened around Qatar. Max wins, Lando is 4th. He would have been 5th until the very last minute as well. And seriously, if that happens, the fallout could be easily very devastating. And it makes more sense as to why McLaren suddenly added more junior drivers. Two of them in particular piqued my interest. The likes of Richard Verschoor, for sure, and Leo Fornaroli, the F2 and F3 champion. The foam of doubt is ringing strong with this one in that maybe he could easily be a backup in case Oscar Piastri walks. Double junior champion, and potentially a very compliant number 2, grateful for the Formula 1 attention, which for the longest time he was not going to be getting. Well, anyway, that's for another video another time, so like the video if you would like to actually see that. But the fallout I don't think is going to be devastating enough for people to lose their jobs, but it would certainly cause a lot of people to be looking back to Zak Brown's illusions of 2007 and thinking they were too much on the nose. Except this time, the drivers have actually been pretty good at being one another. It's their bosses who have been sowing the seeds of division this time with the wider world. I mean, not that they care. And in the midst of McLaren becoming the team that many people love to hate, Red Bull has actually been doing a fairly solid job in regenerating themselves into a more technically minded team, a team that doesn't rely on drama and politics to get by. More united, and Max Verstappen's camaraderie, I think, has been the biggest I've seen since the peak of 2023, which is really saying something. He could actually last at Red Bull all the way, even if they don't have the best car next year, as long as it can be competitive sometimes and win some races when other teams, completely crash out or reliability strikes them. You really feel a sense of bonding with that organisation with Laurent Mekies in charge, but that being said, we have witnessed a fair share of fallout and old habits dying hard after we heard Giampiero Lambiase, the bit that he said that, Kimi let Lando by, and then the Italian got a huge amount of abuse online, which the FIA and Mercedes are very much looking into. So if you said something, then maybe expect Toto Wolff to be knocking on the door, say, "Hi, I heard you disrespected my boy. I pray for your pumpernickel." But this is Mekies' first test of leadership amongst a public relations snafu. And the ill-informed assumption from Max Verstappen's race engineer was then flared up by Helmut Marko. And it sort of cast a shadow over the wholesome act of Max bringing up Hannah Schmitz to the roster with him. And this caused Helmut and Toto to break out their boxing gloves, and they have been collecting dust since Christian had been sacked, I think. Yes, Red Bull did go on to issue a statement, and they were sincerely regretful anything happened. I was initially satisfied. But then, of course, when I had to stop and take a second look at it, which is exactly what Helmut did, I then realised that this wasn't really apology at all. I thought it was, but actually it wasn't really. It was more akin to, sorry your feelings were hurt. I would really hope that Mekies gets a handle on this, because this could easily cause a lot of goodwill to be undone and undermined that we have seen in the last few months, that Red Bull can regenerate themselves into a very engineering-centric team instead of the drama team. This, though, unfortunately didn't help. My thinking maybe with the new corporate era of Red Bull Racing, with Salzburg and Oliver Mintzlaff taking a very serious look at the sport, instead of just allowing them to do their own thing like Matisic did at the top of their career, then maybe Helmut Marko might actually receive some internal rebuking from the likes of the Red Bull head office. We don't know. But yeah, it certainly caused a bit of a disconnect with how Mekies and Marko operate. This is a very strong test. Because Mekies has come out with some barbs against McLaren. And you know what he said? Get ready, it's really, really spicy. Oh, yes, Laurent Mekies said that McLaren have less strong executions. That's it. That's how mean Laurent can get, as in, they're not as good as us, which still implies that they're good. It's just, they're not as good as us. And, well, I mean, he's not wrong. So you're just thinking, oh, well, you're not dramatic then, Laurent, are you? "Ah, Lon, don't you worry, old Helmet knows exactly how to stir up controversy." But yeah, seriously, this needs to stop. In other news, Piastri has been benched going into FP1 at Abu Dhabi, thanks to the mandated young driver FP1 stuff, and teams will be filling out their 4-slot quota as well, 2 times for each car. Oscar makes room for Pato Award this Friday, whilst Arvid Lindblad will fill in for Sonoda in the same sessions. We probably will get more driver announcements in the next couple of days to then make sure that they don't get in trouble with the FIA in Formula 1 because of the young driver program. But the perception from the wider world is that this is pure bias and that Piastri is missing out on 1 hour of very important practice time. And that is a very valid concern, but you gotta remember, this is a very regular occurrence where teams have realised, oh no, we haven't actually, done our, token thing. Quick, get that guy in the car! So this is exactly what has happened. So McLaren, now that they are dropped done, have now just put O'Ward in for 1 more turnaround before he then probably will focus on IndyCar duties alone. But then you've also got to remember that Lando Norris lost out on an hour of practice at Spielberg, and that didn't affect his performance, did it? In fact, it actually hampered him from getting his first ever Grand Slam in the sport that weekend. And besides, it's not like Oscar's just going to be sitting around twiddling his thumbs and doing nothing or playing computer games or something like that. He's going to be passing through the data that O'Ward and Norris are able to generate without the distraction of maybe crashing a car or something like that. He hopes that Pato won't crash it because that is his car, remember? Also, Abu Dhabi's a track that many drivers already sort of know. It's a very test-friendly track, hence why we go testing there the following Monday. Oh man, that's next week. I'm not entirely sure if I'm ready for that to be the case. It's one of those weird things, isn't it? You feel like that this season's been going on forever, but when the season finale's coming around, you're just thinking, wow, that came by quickly. What am I going to do over the winter? Well, don't you worry. The ladder man will continue to yap as best he can. And also, it really helps there'll be early testing. And oh yeah, I forgot to mention, Aston Martin have announced their launch date of their AMR 26, Adrian's first. That being on the 9th of February 2026. 2 days before the second test session at Bahrain, but also a couple of weeks after the first test. A private one around Barcelona where cameras will be thin on the ground or maybe non-existent. We'll basically just have to glean as much information as we can from those because it is indeed a private test. So that means if there are some major embarrassments, we'll only hear about them vicariously. We will not be seeing pictures of the case. It will be just as mysterious as Alonso's freakish accident around 2015 testing. And also, don't get your hopes up regarding the launch itself. I think the 2026 launch season is going to be akin to what happened in 2022, when we basically just got the liveries of the cars. We didn't get the actual car. It's just going to be the paint over what F1's standard car they wheel out to exhibits and shows are going to be. Or maybe there'll be renders of very, very early and rudimentary designs, like Haas did, which got many people concerned due to the fact their side pods looked absolutely hideous. But then when you saw the car out in anger for the first time, it looked nothing like it. And oh yeah, Lewis Hamilton rated the Qatar track as the worst race ever, by the way. On top of him saying, a man with nobody around him to help from his old Mercedes era, he really needed Pete Bonington next to him, as well as maybe James Allison going back over to Ferrari, because that is something not many people know about. James Allison did work at Ferrari for quite a while and helped out Vettel's championship campaigns in the late 2010s. Jerome D'Ambrosio as Fred's second and Loïc Serra, that's okay, but they are not really right there to help Lewis assert his agenda. Right now, he's facing a horse-shaped brick wall. And oh yeah, Mercedes have announced a very major partnership for next year. And now we can proudly say that Mercedes have Pepsi. Yeah, but Pepsi's now going to be a major sponsor, and it's now making me think that if Max goes over there next year, what drink is he going to be hocking instead of Red Bull? Pepsi Max. Okay, let's do the track preview. Although it's not much to write home about, Yas Marina is one of those glossy season finales that often races like a procession. Team drama has to liven it up a bit, as we all know. 16 corners, there are straights, tight 90-degree bends, which makes traction limited the focus, and it's not very kind for overtaking. I will admit though, the curving out of various corners in 2021 did help it make it a little bit more characterful, a little bit more interesting, but it's really still nothing to write home about. It's fine, it's okay. They still need to do a little bit more work to make it particularly, jivey. Overtaking really seriously depends on DRS to do all the heavy lifting, and this is something we've got to realise. Not only is this going to be Sauber's final race, it's the final race of DRS as we know it. But I don't get it. Where is Jenson Button to press the DRS button for the final time? This just is going to feel weird. We are going to be putting into legend the final person to activate DRS? We need to know. We really need to know. And also note this is a twilight race. It's not a straight up night one, so the sun will be out a little bit with temperatures in the high 20s expected. It'll fall a little during the race as the track evolution will also become a big variable, but there won't be any chaos with weather since there's not going to be any rain. Tyre choices, same as last year. C3, C4, C5. And the C6? Oh yeah, I meant to tell you, but obviously the stuff from last week took us completely for a loop. C6, oh, that's not going to be around next year. Not only has Max sent it home, he's also sent it to the retirement home. And yet, I will briefly talk about the top 10, but only very briefly, because that's not exactly the focus here, but you could easily expect both, as well as maybe Kimi Antonelli. Maybe the Williams of Albon might squeak in there, but then there's also the chance of the Racing Bulls having a little bit of a look in, them pushing for 6th place in the Constructors, and then of course you can't count out Fernando Alonso because he just somehow wills the car into existence, because apparently he said there is a spirit inside of that car, which is why he made that errant spin. It just completely took him aback, like he wasn't expecting it. It decided to go like, "Ugh!" See what I mean? It scared Fernando just like that. So for the final part of this season, it's the time of that video where I give you my predictions for the top 5, starting from 5th place down to 1st. Here they are. In 5th place, we have Carlos Sainz. And I think Williams are going to be going into Abu Dhabi as the dark horse of the entire grid, with Ferrari seemingly dropping the ball and giving up on this season, settling for 4th place in the Constructors, Leclerc barely able to score unless there are cars crashing out or retiring in front of him. Then it just makes me think that Williams could step up to the plate as the 4th fastest team this weekend, potentially. The car has good efficiency and strong top speed, which should suit Yas Marina down to the ground with his long straights, and especially with Sainz's plan from Qatar playing out in a big way, transforming the team's prospects around a track which they did not expect to do well at. And also with the weather poised to be stable throughout, it really just gives some quite stable and solid parameters to work from, that maybe the plans that they've been able to work on will then be carried over into Abu Dhabi. And this might be a track where it's really good to people who can be stable on the brakes and kind to their rear tyre, an area which I think that Sainz will indeed shine. It should give Williams the wiggle room to be able to gamble if they choose to do some kind of offset strategy if they are in the mix with Leclerc, which is something that I think will be the case, as in it is going to be very much Carlos versus Charles in this particular battle for 5th. And now it's quite clear that Williams have simply allowed Carlos to have a little bit more bandwidth in which to dictate the race strategy. I'm not saying that he's doing all the heavy lifting, but he's pretty much pulling off what Fernando Alonso has been known to do, in just having the ability to think about multiple things at once as well as driving a car. And also, mentally speaking, he is in a very hungry position. Not only probably he would want to end the season with yet another top 5 finish, but he is now within 9 points of Alex Albon in the championship, and this might be an opportunity for him to get past that by a single point if Albon doesn't score. This will be huge catharsis after such a very unfortunate and very dry first half of the season, where everything that could happen to him often did, as well as him also getting into a few scraps along with other drivers. These 2 podiums that he's now managed to accrue have done wonders for his stock, and it's just making me so proud that my revenge arc has actually come good. I think probably what will happen is that Williams might decide to start on mediums, they'll then go onto the hard tyre and then just see what happens from there. They might then have the agility to be able to go onto a softer tyre if there is a safety car, which can easily happen, as we all know. It just makes me think that Carlos is in a really good place right now to be able to flex his muscles, and he's now been given carte blanche in which to be able to wield his potential. James Vowell's a very, very interesting bedfellow, in that he is allowing this guy to be able to realise his full potential that he might not have been able to do at Ferrari. But then at the same time, you do have to be thinking that maybe some weird results or crashes or off-track politics might sway it in Williams' favour even more. So that is something to consider. They are there, but they are not quite fully there. They certainly way. And then in 4th place, I've got George Russell. And sure, Mercedes have not been the outright reference this entire season. The W16 still has some big issues over the course of this regulation cycle. But I think in the midst of all of this, them locking out P2 fairly convincingly, it goes to show that at the end of this 4-year period of ground effect cars, they have now produced a car which they could describe as pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. The car seems happiest with medium and low speed corners, which should suit Abu Dhabi down to the ground, which should mean a chance for a podium is possible. On the tyre side, Mercedes likely will lean on the C3 a lot since they brought those to testing in spades, I recall. And the team historically likes to build strategy around flexibility, so a one-stop medium hard plan, like with Carlos, seems to be the likely event. That means the car's consistency over long runs will give Russell the option to either push or coast. Whether it will be enough to spoil the fun of one of the title challenges, I am really not entirely sure here, but I think he seriously wants to correct the mistake of the race in Qatar, where he was qualifying right behind Verstappen, Piastri and Norris, and then he fell backwards behind Sainz and Antonelli, and then it was just him having to stake it out, now 50 seconds behind Verstappen at that race. He will want to make sure he has a clean getaway in which to be able to ruffle the feathers of maybe one of the two McLarens, as then Verstappen, but he has now been able to amass over 300 points in a single season, which title favourites. And it's just making me think that next year is going to be amazing, that George deploying track, it's going to be a heavenly combination for any kind of Formula One fan. But for now, though, I think out of anyone on the first couple of rows, or maybe the first 3 rows, George will be probably the most aggressive because he really does not have anything to lose at this point. He can just give it a go. And now this is where you're really curious. Who out of the title challenges is going to be in 3rd place? And does Oscar have enough to be able to thrust himself into P1 potentially for this race? Something that he missed out last time through no fault of his own? Well, no. I think 3rd place is going to be Oscar Piastri, because he is arriving in Abu Dhabi as the outsider, again through no fault of his own. If things had panned out the way it was intended to, he would have only been 14 points behind Norris, and also he would have then cast Verstappen out of the championship entirely. But that hasn't turned out that way. And this means that he is going to just have to dig deep to be the chaos factor in this particular event. He is going to have to expect a minor miracle from Lando and Max just thinking about themselves, getting into some kind of tangle, and then Oscar just slides on through and then takes the spoils, at least having the final say in that, hey, at least I won the final race. But the question is, though, will McLaren actually allow Piastri to do his own thing? The eyes of the world are going to be watching that McLaren pit wall and paying attention to what the team radio will be saying. And trust Liberty Media, they will be broadcasting it as much as they possibly can. They will be waiting for the moment when, if it gets to a situation where Max does go on to win and he's leading, Lando decides to settle for 2nd, and Piastri's in 3rd, and he's closing in on Lando. Could there be a potential moment where Tom Stallard tells Oscar to hold position to make sure that he is the rear gunner and that there's no other shenanigans behind him in case there's a very plucky George, defend against Russell and Leclerc and Sainz? That could happen. And then you'd be wondering, well, what does Piastri do about it? Because that is something to consider, because it's been very friendly hunting grounds for Norris, this track, the last couple of years, so, you know, it is a scenario. He is in a place where, again, he has nothing left to lose. He can be a little bit more bold when it comes to qualifying. It's a case of do or die. If he can just extract more from the car than Norris, who might have to play it safe because, well, he completely fell down in qualifying in Qatar again, didn't he? Then Oscar didn't, and he completely dominated that Losail track in all of those qualifying events. And it just is that thing that it could easily be the cat amongst the pigeons, politically speaking. What happens in that regard? Because you might be thinking, oh, well, Lando might let him through for 2nd place or something, or maybe Norris will settle for 3rd. Well, then what happens in case he has a mistake and there's a charging George Russell right behind him and he then gets overtaken, or maybe he's chewed up through the tyres, or maybe there's some kind of error? Because you got to remember, they made a big deal about Max Verstappen changing his power unit for Qatar due to reliability concerns. What is making me think that that is weird is that maybe that reliability issue is to making sure that it's extra ultra fresh for the final race. Yeah, questions for later. But yeah, he'll be hoping that what happened last year to him, vulnerable emotionally. He leads the standings, but he saw a chance to close it out as early as Vegas slip away. He was almost 50 points ahead of 3/4 of that advantage lost, and those points were effectively handed to him by his team, who completely let he and Oscar down. But for Norris, it is still doable. Finish on the podium and he's champion. That's all he's got to do. Because that target of just being in the top 3 will shape his side of the garage's entire weekend. What do you do? Well, they'll probably be aiming for a car that's kind to its tyres and will be able to suffer in the traffic. That if he just ends up being pegged to the back of Max Verstappen's car, it's got to have a setup which will be more forgiving to his front tyres and make sure they don't get baked. So I think he'll also be going for a medium-hard strategy and just getting off the line as quickly as possible, then getting into some kind of a groove, and then pitting a little bit earlier in the hoping to go long and get some kind of undercut on Verstappen, and to make sure that he just brings the car home. And also, if he does go on the C3 and there is some kind of late-stage safety car, if they can keep at least one set of decently used softs to hand, there could be a cheeky moment in which they can go to a different and softer tyre compound to be able to defend more. But yeah, ultimately, I don't know how Lando's going to be reacting on race day itself. It could be a case of, well, I'm still 12 points ahead of Max. I just have to bring it home on a track I actually quite like and I won last year. I'm not actually in that big of a problem. But then, of course, he could also be thinking, she wrapped this up in Vegas and gone into Qatar on a canter, and I'm now having to do all of this work, and the weight of the world is on my shoulders. I really should have done this in Qatar, because the amount of prestige that this championship has now has been compromised. It's not nearly as prestigious if he could win it with a race to spare. And it was through no fault of his own. That is something he needs to consider. That a team error, yet again, compromised him through something he did not do. But he really does have to think about caution or domination. Does he go and try and do what Oscar and Max might want to try and do and at least say they at least won the most amount of races this year? But I think the most sensible read out of all of this is that, yeah, he will try at the start to get ahead of him. It becomes clear that he's just not got enough to be able to take Max cleanly or safely. Then he'll just plump for second place and then just make sure he's got at least enough distance to not cook his tyres, but at least have enough in the tank in case Piastri decides to try something, and then maybe hoping against hoping that papaya rules suddenly aren't a thing, and then team orders then help him out, and then Oscar's told to hold position. And he won't care what people think. And the same thing could easily apply to the likes of Max Verstappen, who will also want a case of like, well, I got this far, I didn't think I would get this far, so I want the universe to throw him yet another bone. And you got to admit, since Zandvoort, the universe, the deficit from over 100 to now just a dozen points. That is a comeback which will go down in legend. And if he can convert it, it will be easily his most impressive championship, right up there with 2023, and a generational story for years to come. And if he does get his 5th straight title, this will be something that his rival Lewis Hamilton never did, and only the likes of Michael Schumacher has been able to achieve. So there's nothing really left for him to do, it's just go for the win. The Red Bull's no longer as dominant as it was a couple of years ago, but it's still incredibly complete, and it's had a huge transformation this year after its Monza package. It does tend to like its tyres around softer compounds, and of course low-speed corners, which does matter through Yas Marina's stop-start sections as well. And then let's not forget, with the C5 tyre, it actually should be really advantageous for the likes of Verstappen to be able to at least get on the front row, ideally pole, and then just do what he always does. And I know you're bored of me saying it, but he will then go on to dictate the pace of the race. And maybe if they've got that strategic flexibility, they'll be able to maybe force McLaren's hand yet again, because that's exactly what they did around Qatar with the lap cap. And it wouldn't surprise me that over the course of this week, Red Bull bring out the knives in a logistical way and an engineering way to really undermine McLaren as their rivals, because, as Mickey said, they have McLaren less strong executions. Yes, it's not particularly sexy, but it is accurate. Red Bull have dropped the ball many times this year themselves, but they have certainly gotten their act together when they needed to. And then, of course, as I alluded to, Max Verstappen's mental state is absolutely calm. He was not expecting to be right here in Abu Dhabi just a few weeks ago, when he was completely writing things after going out in Q1 for the first time on pure pace. Now, he's just 12 points. This is doable. If Lando just repeats what he was able to do in Qatar, then he's got it. Max will have his 5th world title. And again, he's got 7 wins to his name, Max. He's already achieved more than he was expecting back in March of this year anyway. And he'll most likely go about wanting to lead by just enough to cover off over some kind of undercut from Norris maybe. So I'm expecting a gap of like 5, 6, 7 seconds or something. Just so that means he's got enough rubber in case there is a bigger challenge, or if there's a safety car restart. And then if Norris does finish second behind him, he'll be just thinking, look, I got as close as I possibly could. Ultimately, I managed to get the gap down to 5 points. 5 points. And that is something that I think he could be proud of, getting it down from over 100 to just 5. And as narratives go, that is a very compelling one, but he will certainly be looking back at the Spanish Grand Prix, him losing so many points in one go due to a case of red mist, and then think, I cannot be doing that again. We have seen a huge wake-up call from Verstappen, and it will only change him for the better and make him even more intense next year. George knows he can anger Max, and he will be doing that so much next year. And if he does lose out, he'll shrug his shoulders, he'll congratulate Lando, he'll do things calmly and professionally. But I certainly do think that a certain amount of respect for Lando as a driver has been lost this year. And I also sense that you will click this video over here because something tells me you'll really like this one and want to stick around. So I'll see you over there.